Good morning, everyone. Hello, my name is Mei Yi, and thank you once again, kids, for joining us on this Saturday to talk about another aspect of climate change. So, today we are supposed to talk about agriculture and how agriculture is part of the problem and maybe also part of the solution for climate change. We were supposed to hear from another professional who is going to be sharing with us about his work in agriculture. Unfortunately, he will not be able to present to everyone today. So instead, I will be presenting. I hope that you are not too disappointed that you don't get to hear from another professional. Because I am not a professional within the agricultural sector myself, what I will do instead is I will share with you what other people are doing within the agriculture sector, so that you have a view of what are the different things that are happening in agriculture, what are people trying to do to address climate change. Okay, so as always, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, always use the chat box to talk to me. Today, I will not be able to respond to you so quickly on the chat box because I am talking to you. But again, if I see any of your comments, I will have a chat with you. Okay, and before we start, I know that many of you're going back to school next week. So are you excited? Let me know how you feel, whether you're ready to go back to school or you're dreading it. Oh no, you have to go back to school. Are you feeling nervous? How do you feel? Let me know. I'm very excited to go back to meet all of my students in person in class. So if any of my students are here, please say hi to me. I would love to see who is here joining today. Besides that, I hope that everyone will keep safe and take care because, we still have cases of coronavirus vaccines. So just have to take care of yourself. Make sure if you go to school that you're wearing mask and so on. Okay. Oh, Sidratu, you're not going back. Oh, why is that? So this is we are coming to the end of the climate change series already, but I am very excited that we have managed to do 7 different series. So if you have missed the previous one, please go back to this YouTube channel and look at some of the videos that we have previously. We covered everything from coronavirus vaccines, how they're developed, how it's transported, to, of course, climate change and so many different aspects of climate change. So do go back and have a look at it. So with that, without further ado, I am going to start today's talk. Okay, and I am going to be talking about agriculture. You've heard of agriculture before, kids? You may know that agriculture is about growing crops, but I want to define what it is that you're one example is that maybe if you grow cotton, that is what you are using for your clothes. Fish, all of this that is being produced is part of what agriculture is. Okay, so that is what agriculture is: production of crops and animals for food and other uses. And so I just want to go through with you today what we will be talking about before we start. So like I mentioned, I am going to cover a little bit about what other people are doing within the agriculture sector. But before that, I will give you an idea about how agriculture is contributing to climate change. And then finally, we're going to talk about a big part of the problem within agriculture, which is food waste. So this is what we're going to be covering today. Okay. So first up, let's talk about how does agriculture contribute to climate change. Now, we have seen this slides many times. This is the third time now that we're seeing it, just because I think it gives you a very good idea when we talk about carbon emission, meaning we put carbon into the atmosphere. If you look at this green line here on the left, what it's showing is really that food and agriculture and land use contributes 24% to carbon emission. So that is really big. It is almost as big as electricity production. Okay, and then remember that on the right-hand side is the sinks, carbon sink, which is what takes carbon out of the atmosphere and storing it either in the soil, in the ground, or in the water, in the ocean, right? So given that, agriculture is such a big part of what carbon emission, such a big component of carbon emission, let's look a little bit about how agriculture does that. How does agriculture contribute to carbon emission? Okay, so now let's talk about conventional agriculture. What does conventional mean? It's just a word that means how we normally do things. So today, normally, how do we practice agriculture? Firstly, in order to start growing anything on the ground, there is something called tilling. So what is tilling? It's effectively using a machine to dig up the soil and turn it over. This is the first step in the process. Why do farmers want to do this? Why do they want to do tilling? Firstly, if the soil is very hard, then they cannot put seed into the soil, right? So the tilling actually turns the soil upside down so that it's very soft and they can put the seed inside. Secondly, there are weeds. Do you know what are weeds? Weeds is a kind of plant where farmers don't like weeds because weeds is not a plant that they want to grow. Instead, it is the plant that competes with the plants that they want to grow. So if you have weeds, sometimes your crops may not grow so healthily. So when they use the tilling machine, they also dig up all the weeds as well. So this is the first part of the process. After they do that, they do seeding. So seeding is very simply putting seed into the soil. And finally, they grow the crops. And what do they do to grow the crops? They have to water the plants. Besides watering the plant, they have to also put pesticide. Pesticide is a kind of chemical that you put onto the plant so that you can kill the pest, like insects and other things that are eating your plants. So farmers, they don't like that the insects are eating their plants, right? So they use pesticide onto the plants. And finally, to help the crops grow big, they put something called fertilizer. Now, fertilizer is something that will help your plant, gives the plant nutrients so that they can absorb and they can grow big. Okay, so these are, all the different steps that is in what is practiced today in conventional agriculture. Okay, if you have any questions, just put into the chat box. All right. So now, very simple conventional agriculture. This is how it's done. This is on growing plants. Now, let's talk about what about growing meat? What about growing animals? There's too much to talk about because, you can talk about growing cows, growing chickens, fish, and so on. All of this is part of agriculture as well. But I'll just use an example of growing chickens to explain how conventional agriculture takes care of growing animals. So firstly, they put all the animals together in one confined space so the animals don't run around so much. They all put in one space. This is to make it easy so that the people who are taking care of the animals, they know that all the animals are kept safe in one place. After that, the plants that you grow just now, some of it actually goes towards feeding the animals. So you feed the animals from the crops that you grow so that they can grow big. And finally, the animals, After they eat, what happens? They poop, right? So the poop is the waste, and they have to manage the waste as well. So these are kind of three very simple aspects and components of growing meat and animals in conventional agriculture. So then you ask yourself, right? Okay, it sounds like I'm growing vegetables, I'm taking care of animals. Why is that contributing to carbon emission? Why is that contributing to climate change? So I'm going to talk a little bit about how agriculture is causing damage to nature. The first one, very simply, is that there is carbon emission. Okay, agriculture puts carbon emission into the atmosphere. And how does it do that? Because plants, if you think about it, plants are like they take carbon dioxide, right, from the atmosphere, and then they use it, and then they photosynthesize and they put oxygen into the atmosphere. So I'm going to explain a little bit about how, even though you're growing crops, you are actually contributing carbon emissions. But first, let's talk about the biggest carbon emission in agriculture, which is the animals. So animals like, cows, for example, they actually, when they eat, their stomach, they are a ruminant animal. So their stomach is very different from ours. It's very long. As a result, there's a lot of gas that is being produced in their stomach. And when there's gas, what happens? Can you guess what happens when you have gas in your stomach? You burp, right? So you burp. And when you burp, especially for cows, when they burp, something comes out that is called methane. Methane is CH4. It's not CO2, but it is also a form of carbon. And in fact, it is even more potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. If you remember the lecture by Prof. Azizan, he talked about greenhouse gas. Greenhouse gas are just the gases that trap radiation from the sun from escaping the earth. And therefore, our earth becomes warmer, correct? Now, methane is actually 21 times even more potent at trapping the radiation than carbon dioxide. So it is really huge in terms of the impact when you have a lot of methane. And cows, even though they're very cute, they actually produce a lot of methane. So that is part of what contributes to making the earth warmer. Now, the second thing of why agriculture contributes to carbon emission is tilling. Now, we talked just now about the first step in conventional agriculture, where you have to till the land. So the question is, why is it that tilling is causing carbon emission? I want you to see a little bit of how it looks like. So this is an example of a man, a farmer, who is tilling his land. So they use this machine and then they dig it up. Now, digging up the soil, how does that contribute to carbon emission? So to do that, to explain that, we have to go back to what is inside the soil itself. Again, going back to Prof. Azizan, he says about biome. If you remember, biome is simply what is the interaction between the ecosystem and the organism within the ecosystem. So in this case, it is the soil biome. But we call it microbiome because you can't actually see the organism. They are microorganisms. They are really small. But even though they're really small, they play a very important part. There are all of these different types of microbes in the soil. There are bacteria, there are fungi, and all of them have a very important job to do. And they don't just do this job themselves. They actually work together with the plants. So if you look at the plants on the top layer, they work like a straw, okay? So the plants will suck the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and then they will pull it into the soil through their roots. So their roots over here, actually, they bring carbon into the soil through their roots. And carbon is actually really important for a lot of living things. So the microbes, the small, small organisms within the soil, they all are using the carbon for themselves. So the plant is helping to grow the microbes within the soil. Now, in return, these microbes, they also do other things for the plants. So, for example, the plants, they need something called nitrogen. But nitrogen by itself, the plants are not able to use it. So they need these microbes to help tie this nitrogen. They tie the nitrogen onto the roots of the plants, and then the plants are able to use the nitrogen as nutrient. You see, so they are helping each other out. And when this process happens, right, the carbon also gets trapped into the soil. So it's called carbon sequestration. Okay, it's a very long word, but actually what it means is just you're trapping the carbon into the soil so it doesn't escape into the atmosphere. So the microbes are playing this very important role. And then on top of that, the soil itself is really important because it has this small little pockets of air inside. And this small little pockets of air is where the water are also stored inside. So when it rains, the water goes inside the soil and it is stored there. And even when it is not raining, the plants are still able to use the water that is stored inside the soil. So the soil itself is just really, really wonderful place. Some scientists say that the soil is like the same level of diversity as a rainforest. It is so diverse, the different microbes inside the soil. Now, if we talk about the rainforest, you remember Mariam from last week? She talks about how diverse the rainforests are. There are elephants, there are tigers, there are monkeys, there are all of these different plants, and they are all really living together within the rainforest. Now, imagine the soil has as much diversity as the rainforest. So it is really, really rich. It's just that they're so small, but we can't see it. Now imagine what happens if you till it, meaning you are actually turning the soil upside down, right? It's like imagining turning this rainforest upside down. Everything will just be so messy. Now, all these microbes, they all have their little job that they're doing, right? Oh, I am doing this, I'm doing that job. All of this job is really important. But imagine their home, which is the soil, is now turned upside down. Then what happens? They are like so lost. They wouldn't know what to do. And when you turn up the soil, importantly, remember the carbon sequestration, the carbon that is stored away. Now, that carbon is being released into the atmosphere. So the microbes, they die when you turn up the soil. They are not able to do the very important job to keep the soil healthy once you do that. And then on top of that, the carbon that is stored in the soil, they all are released. So that is how you have carbon emissions when you till the land. So it's very long explanation as to why carbon emission happens when you till the land, but that is really one of the downsides when that happens. Okay, and finally, what is the third reason that agriculture is contributing to carbon emission? If again we go back to Mariam's wonderful slide, you remember she talked about in the forest, in nature, there are things that it goes from preservation, but you don't touch it at all. There's no human impact. There's no human involvement, all the way to exploitation, where you cut down everything. Now, you remember that when you're doing conventional agriculture, you have people tilling the land, right? But what if you have no land? What if you don't have an existing farm and you want to grow more crops? Okay. So if they need more land, usually they're not going to come to your house or my house and then they say, okay, I'm going to take your land now and grow coconut or whatever. Instead, they're going to go to forest because no one is going to shout at them or something. So they cut down all the trees, and then they use it as forest. And again, once you cut down the trees, remember what happens? There is carbon emission. So carbon is released into the atmosphere. So just to recap, when we do agriculture, there is carbon emissions into the atmosphere. And the ways in which we have carbon emissions into the atmosphere through agriculture is number one, we grow animals that will burp a lot of methane. Methane is 21 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Second reason is when we till the land and we turn the soil around, we release carbon into the atmosphere. And finally, when we cut down trees and we cut down rainforests in order to have more farmland, that is also how we contribute to the carbon emissions. Okay, so any questions so far? Okay, so so this is the first way in which agriculture is damaging the nature. Second, also very important one is water. Okay, like I mentioned, when you plant crops, you need to water the plants, right? Sometimes the water comes naturally from the rain. Sometimes they need more water than what comes up from the rain. So the farmer will divert water from river and lakes and to water the plants. And finally, there is also what is called underground water. So in certain parts of the world where water is not so easily available, they have to use water underground in order to water plants for the crops. Now, let's not forget also that when we talk about agriculture, there is something called aquaculture. Okay, think of the fish that you eat and the crabs and the prawns and so on. Sometimes the fishermen, they go out to the sea and they catch all of this so that we can eat them. But sometimes we also grow them. So there will be ponds in which we grow fish and all of this seafood that we eat. And that also uses a lot of water. In fact, agriculture uses 70% of water usage, of all fresh water usage. And if you think about it, that 70% sounds like it's a lot, right? But what exactly does that mean? So I'm going to show you this. If you look at this chart, what it tells you is how many liters of water is needed in order to produce 1 kilogram of this food. Okay, so we start from right at the right-hand side, which is potatoes. So in order to produce 1 kg of potatoes, you need 287 liters of water. Who loves French fries here? Very yummy, right? That is the amount of water it requires. But some plants are actually, they may need more water than others. Like, for example, corn needs 1,222 liters of water. And meat is actually the highest, especially beef. My goodness, beef is 15,400 liters to produce 1 kg of beef. What does that mean? 15,000 liters sounds like it is a lot, right? So let me put it this way. If you were to take a 5-minute shower, that will be 50 liters of water that you use. Okay. Now, if you shower twice a day, 5 minutes twice a day, that means you're using 100 liters of water a day to shower. And if you shower 5 minutes a day, twice a day, every day for 5 months, that is the same amount of water that you will use as it is required to make 1 kg of beef. Okay, so that's a lot of water. And when we think about there's so much water being used, let's not forget about what happens to the water that comes out of farms as well. Okay, they are called runoffs. So remember just now we said that the farmers, they have to put pesticides and fertilizer, but some of this pesticides and fertilizer, because they just spray it, right? It actually goes into the ground and it actually seeps into the water. Sometimes this means that the water becomes polluted and we can't drink it. Okay. if you think about the water that you have at home, you turn on the tap and you wash your hands. These days, you have to wash your hands a lot, right? That it doesn't seem to affect us. But in many other countries in the world, actually, water is very hard to get. In fact, 2.1 billion people, 2.1 billion people, okay, that is 3 out of 10 people in the world, does not have access to safe, available water easily. Okay, 260 million people, they have to travel 30 minutes each time to get water for their use at home. And many of them are going to be children, somewhat like your age. They will be sent out by their parents to go out 30 minutes to take water and bring back to the home so everyone can use. So for many of the people who are living in these places, water is very, very precious indeed. And so the more water is being used in agriculture, that means that there will be less water that's available. And the more water that is being polluted because of agriculture, again, that means there's less water that is being used for them. So that is how water is being affected in agriculture. All right. So again, to cap it, their agriculture uses 70% of all the fresh water usage that we use, 70%. And on top of that, there is also pollution of the water that comes out of farms because of all the pesticide and fertilizer. And don't forget, if you grow animals as well, the waste also goes into the water. So that is how water is being polluted because of agriculture. All right. And finally, let's talk about the third way in which agriculture is damaging nature, which is the loss of biodiversity. Again, we go back to the wonderful rainforest that we see, right? Now, the thing is, sometimes when you have to clear forests in order to have agriculture being grown, many of these animals have no more homes. They lost their homes. So they can't find a new home, and sometimes they die out. So, and the more they die out, sometimes they become endangered or even extinct. Do you know that 1 acre of land is being cleared every second for agriculture? Now, how big is 1 acre of land? If you ever play football or you've ever seen football, 1 football field is about 1 acre of land. Now, 1 football field of land is being lost to agriculture every second. Now, I have been talking to you for 27 minutes and 36 seconds, 37 seconds, 38 seconds. You can imagine how much of land is lost or is being cleared in order to make way for agriculture. I'm not sure if you remember this, but a year or two ago, there is this big fire that is going on in the Amazon. The Amazon is the biggest forest in the world. It is the lung of the world. It is called the lung of the world because of how much it is absorbing carbon dioxide and producing oxygen. Now, a huge part of Amazon was burning about a year or two ago as a result of it being cleared to make way for agricultural land. Even if we look closer to home, like Indonesia, our neighbor has lost already 70% of its forest as well. So this is something that is very rapidly happening. Today, about 40% of all the land in the world, if you think of the whole world, all right, 40% of it is being used for agriculture. Okay. Today in the world, we have 7.8 billion people. 7.8 billion, it sounds like a lot, right? Now in 2050, which is 30 years from now, by then maybe you're about 40 years old, you're an adult by that time, there will be 9 billion people in the world. Just think about how many more people we need to feed. We need to provide food for them. And on top of that, we need to provide them places to live. So the more of the land that we use for agriculture, the less land is available for other uses. And also because we have more people, we need to produce ever more food to feed people. This becomes very quickly very unsustainable. Okay, so our planet is coming under a lot of pressure due to agriculture. And on top of that, people who are in agriculture, they understand and they're aware of this problem because guess what? When there's climate change, it actually affects agriculture sector as well. I'm sorry about this slide; it looks a little bit blur, but there's a study that is showing that around the world, the output, meaning how much crop you can get, is actually dropping because of climate change. So it is making the agricultural sector much more difficult to run, and they are producing less food because of climate change. So people within the agricultural sector also need to know that they need to protect the planet in order to make sure that agriculture can continue to produce and give us food. So that is the challenge that we have, right? So I think I have made you sufficiently depressed and horrified at what is happening in the world. I don't want to just talk about the big problem, even though I do want you to understand what the problem is, okay, which is why I went into such detail about it. But I want to talk about what people are doing in the agricultural sector to solve this problem. Okay, so before I go into that, I want to ask if you have any questions that you have for me. I will address them. Okay, so if there are no questions, I'm just going to go on and talk a little bit about what are some innovation in the agricultural sector that people are thinking about. Okay, some of this innovation are very high tech, and I'm really excited about this new technology that's available today. That is called vertical farming. So, what is vertical farming? So, horizontal is like this, right? Vertical is like this. So, if you think about farming, usually you have to plant the food on the land. So it's all just one layer and flat, right? But in vertical farming, you are stacking up all of the plants so that you are using less space. Okay. And vertical farming is very high tech because if you think of all the normal elements that is required to help crops grow, it's all translated into technology. So let me explain what that means. So if you think about growing a plant, you need, of course, sunlight, and then you need water, and then you need nutrition in the soil. Very simple. But when it comes to vertical farming, instead of having sunlight, you have this lamp over here. So this is called a full spectrum lamp. And it is mimicking what the sun would have given to the plant in terms of light. And if you see that this is stacked up, how many layers? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Some of the bigger vertical farmings, it could go up to 10, 15 different layers. And every layer needs to have its own lamp so that the plants are not blocked, and it has its own direct lamp for it to grow, right? So that's one element. The second element is the water. Now, many of these plants, they don't actually grow on soil. It doesn't need soil anymore. It is growing in water, the hydroponic, and then it has some of these sponges so that the sponges are wet and then the plants are growing inside the sponge itself. And on top of that, the nutrients that the plants need, they are all put inside the sponge. So it's very targeted, and they don't put a lot. They don't just pour all the water in. So you use a lot less water, and you use a lot less fertilizer as well, because you only need to be very targeted and putting all the fertilizer in the plants. So you reduce a lot of the water usage, and you reduce a lot of the pollution as well. So So if you look at, let's talk about lettuce, right? I like lettuce a lot. Let's just look at the first one, which is water usage, right? If, let's say, you want to produce lettuce, you will, per kg of lettuce, you use about 250 liters of water. This is for conventional agriculture. Now, if we look at vertical farm, 1 kilo of lettuce only use 1 liter of water. So that's very much, less water that is being used. And let's go back to open field, right? If you have 1 square meter of space to grow lettuce, it gives you 3.9 kg of lettuce. But if you have 1 square meter of space in vertical farming, it may give you up to 120 kg of lettuce, right? And because of the space that is being used, where the vertical farming is, right? You don't have to put the farm very far away. You don't have to put it in Cameron Highlands. It can be right here. It can be right near your school. It can be right near your house where there's a small space. You can put the vertical farm in there, so it doesn't have to travel very far. So if you're talking about normal farms, usually the food has to travel very far to get to you. Maybe you buy your apples from Australia, your oranges from America, and so on. With vertical farms, the food can be right next to you. It's very, very close. And this is the benefit of vertical farm. You use very much less water because it's so targeted. I remember we say that water use is a lot in agriculture, 70%. Now you can reduce that because water is very precious. You can use a lot less fertilizer, so we don't pollute the water that comes from the farm. And then you use less land because you can stack it up really high. Now remember, land use is a big one. You have to burn forests and so on to create farm. Now, maybe you don't have to do that because you can just use any piece of land that is available in the city, in your school, in all these different places, and you can create space for you to grow the plants. And because it is inside, it is not outside, in the nature and so on. It's inside, so it's very controlled. And therefore, the animals that come, the pest that comes, is also very controlled. So you don't have to use any pesticide. So it sounds really wonderful, right? Like vertical farming. Why don't we do it today? We should do so many. And we do. We do have vertical farms. We have vertical farms in Malaysia also. But there are some downsides to vertical farms, okay? Because it's a very new technology as well. So number one is that it's very energy intensive. Remember, it does not use sunlight anymore, right? It uses light. So you have to use electricity in order to, give the plant enough light. So it's very energy intensive. So some of the farms, they also put solar power on top of the roof so that, you don't have to create more carbon emissions. So energy intensive. Second thing is that it's very expensive because it's very high tech. You need people who are trained to do this. You need to set it up correctly. There are systems to monitor. You need to make sure the nutrients, the water, etc. So it's quite expensive to do it. And finally, right now, vertical farming is only able to produce a very limited number of vegetables. So because it's still a new technology. So these are some of the downsides that's in vertical farming. Okay, so pros and cons, but very exciting new practice that is not conventional agriculture. What is the second practice that we have today? It's called regenerative agriculture. Okay, I know it's a very big word. Regenerative is to say that you don't want to kill the soil. You want the soil to regenerate. Now, remember, I was telling you about the microbiome, the wonderful microbiome of the soil. When you till it, it all dies, right? Regenerative agriculture actually helps to grow the health and make sure that the microbes are back into the soil. So that's really good, right? And how do you do regenerative agriculture? It is going back to, it's not high tech, it's actually going back to old practice. Now, this is on my left here is conventional agriculture. For conventional agriculture, you see you have the tilling over here, okay? And then the animals, they are put separately. They don't hang out together with the plants. And then you only grow one type of crop. So if you grow corn, it's all just corn. If you grow soybean, it's all just soybean, okay? Now this is regenerative agriculture. When you look at regenerative agriculture, they plant many different types of plants together, not just one. And they grow what is called the cover crop. Cover crop are crops that are higher, so they help to cover the crop underneath and the soil underneath, and it gives a level of protection to the plants. And then you put the animals and the plants together, which is how we used to do it many, many years back. What does the animal do? Number one, you don't have to till because the animal will eat all the weeds. Okay, so you just let them go and then they eat all the weed. You don't even have to till to remove the weed. Secondly, what does the animal do after they eat? They poop. Okay, now they poop everywhere, and you think, oh, that's very gross. But actually, their poop is full of nutrients. So their poop has nitrogen, it has phosphorus and potassium. These are all things that the plants actually need to grow. So as a result, the soil becomes very rich, and you don't have to put fertilizer anymore because the poop is the fertilizer itself. And because you don't have to spray all this fertilizer, guess what? The fertilizer is not going to go into the water and then pollute the water. All right. So regenerative agriculture is actually very healthy. It helps to put the carbon in the atmosphere back into the soil, you reduce a lot of the pesticide, a lot of the fertilizer, all the things that are very damaging that is done by conventional agriculture. Okay, and related to regenerative agriculture is called agroforestry. Okay, so the word agro is like the short form for agriculture, and forestry is obviously for forest. So agroforestry is where instead of burning down the forest, right, that's exploitation. Remember what Mariam was teaching us? We are growing the plants, the crops that we want within the forest itself so that it helps to grow them together. It's like conservation. It's like conserving the forest, but you're growing other plants together as well. Now, this is very successful in a country called Costa Rica. Costa Rica is in South America, okay, very far from here. Now, Costa Rica is very famous for one thing. Well, it's famous for many things, but one of the things it's famous for is chocolate. So they grow cacao, and cacao is the seed that they make into chocolate. Now, cacao is very fragile. It's very easily damaged by fungus and all sorts of types of diseases. But when they grow it in the forest together with all the other plants in there, the cacao becomes very healthy. So their cacao produce becomes very successful. And more than that, Costa Rica actually managed to increase their forest cover. So their forest cover is the amount of forest in their country. It was at about 30%, and then now they grow it back to 52%. So it becomes a very, very successful story for agroforestry around the world. Does Malaysia have agroforestry? Yes, but not so big yet. We are trying to do it with timber. Timber are the kind of very strong tree. The wood is very strong, and we use it to make furniture. Okay, so that is also something that we're trying. So these are some of the exciting things that's happening in agriculture. Now, if that is something that you are interested in, there's something that excites you, you think, hey, I can do something about it, it's a great time to learn more about what they're doing. Okay. And finally, I'm going to talk about food waste because it is such a big problem when we think about food and agriculture, and it's such a problem that is so unnecessary, I suppose. And let's talk about food waste. Okay. So every year we waste 1.3 billion tons of food. That's like a lot, right? But how do you think about that? Now, I want to use this 9 slices of bread as a way to explain a little bit about how much food we're wasting. Now, imagine all the crops in the world, okay? All the crops and plants in the world that we grow is represented in this 9 slices of bread, okay? So all the crops become these 9 slices of bread. Now, what happens to these 9 slices of bread? Number one, the very first thing that happens is that many of these crops, even though you take time to grow them, you put water and so on, they're going to rot in the field itself, in the farm itself. Okay, why is that? Because sometimes in developing countries, meaning countries that don't have all of this high-tech investment, they don't have places to store the plants and the fruits and the vegetables and the fruits that they have planted. So they go bad. They go bad in the farm itself. Okay, so 1 out of 9 of all the crops that we grow in the world, it just goes bad and we waste it even before we manage to harvest it. Okay, so out of the 9 pieces of bread, now we only have 8. Okay, now we think about 3 more slices of bread. And out of these 3 slices of bread, we feed it to our animals. So all the crops that we grow, remember just now I mentioned we grow the crops and then we use it as feed to feed our animals. But animals, they are not very, yes, you know, we grow animals and we eat their meat, right? So in a way you think, okay, we're just using 3 different, we're using these 3 pieces of bread of crops that we grow and then we get to eat it as meat. Well, not really, because animals, they are not very efficient. So out of that we feed them, 2/3 get wasted into heat and poop. Okay, so in the end, we only get to eat 1 slice of bread. Out of the 3, we only have 1 more slice left out of the meat. Okay, now we have 5 more slices of bread, right? And out of this 5 slices of bread, 2 more is wasted as food that is thrown out. Now, every time we think about food waste, I think this is what we are thinking about, right? Food that we cannot finish, or food from restaurants, food from supermarkets, food from hotels, and it cannot finish, so we throw it out. So that is what we think about as food waste. And it also, many of it also comes from homes. So finally, this is what we get to eat. Out of 9 pieces of bread, out of all the crops in the world, 9 pieces, we only get to eat 4. Now, isn't that very wasteful? We are wasting a lot. And if we think about how the world will have 9 billion people in 2050, how much more wastage is going to happen, right? Now, before this, we talk about solar energy, we talk about electric car, all of these things, they help with climate change. But they also need money, right? You have to install solar, you have to buy electric car, and all of that need money. But food waste, that's something that, you don't actually have to pay more money, you just have to waste less food. But how can we do that, right? It's quite difficult because even in Malaysia today, we waste enough food every day to feed 12 million people every day. Every day, the food that we waste, if we have not wasted them, we could have fed 12 million people. That is a lot, okay? And if we think about the food that is avoidable, meaning that it is still edible when we throw it away, okay? It's not bad or anything. It's still edible for whatever reason we throw it away. That is 3,000 tons a day that we throw out. And that actually can feed 2.2 million people. That is more than everyone in Kuala Lumpur. Okay, so that's a lot that we're throwing out. And you know what? It is also wasting money because that means that we're wasting per person 2,700 ringgit a year just on wasted food, right? So what can we do about food wastage? Okay, it's a very systematic problem. But again, there are other people who are trying out different things, trying out new things in order to prevent food wastage. So let's talk about one of the first one. So remember the first slice of bread, it is being lost even before we manage to take it out and harvest it, right? Because there's no place to store, there's no place to keep the food fresh. So there are new innovation now whereby they create this kind of fridge in places like India, and they put solar panel on top so that they can keep this fridge cold even when it is outside in the farms and the fields. So this helps to reduce some of the waste that happens because of the food going bad in the farm itself. Okay. And secondly, we have organizations like the Lost Food Project. And the Lost Food Project is a organization within Malaysia. What they do is that they look at supermarkets, they look at places where there are some food that is about to expire. Okay. And usually supermarket, when the food is about to expire, they throw it away. Or some of the vegetables, maybe they're not so fresh anymore, and they also throw it away. And what Lost Food Project does is that they go in and they take some of these food from the supermarkets and so on, and they give it to people who don't have food, people who are food insecure, meaning they're not sure whether they have food tomorrow, the next day, and so on. So they have done a great job in helping to bring some of this food that otherwise would have been thrown away and give it to people who need it. They do a lot more than that, because if you think about a problem that is very systemic, meaning it's not just about one person changing something and we can solve the problem. It's about a society problem, right? So one of the things they do is that they talk to their leaders. Okay, this is called lobbying. Lobbying means that they go to their members of parliament, they go to their ministers and they say, hey, change the law so that we can take more of this food that would have been wasted and we give it to people who don't have food. So what kind of law did they change? This happens about 2 years ago, where they get our government to change a law so that people who donate food to other people, they don't have to worry if the food ends up going bad. So what this means is that people sometimes, like hotels and so on, they don't want to give away the food that they have, even though it was perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with the food, but they are scared that if people eat the food and then they have a stomach ache or anything, that they get sued. They have to pay a lot of fines in courts. So they changed the law so that if the food is still good, they can still give it to other people. They don't have to worry about people suing them. So these are some of the things that an organization like Lost Food Projects are doing to try to solve the problem at a systemic level. Okay, so I've shared with you about what some other people are doing to try and solve the problem at a systemic level, be it agricultural innovation, technology, or even going back to old agricultural practices, ways to stop food wasting, and so on. So it's time for you to think about what you would like to do in the future. If is agriculture something that you want to think about? It's we think about farming and we're like, oh, it's not so sexy, but I think it's really fun and it's really exciting, and you can have such a huge impact because of changing practices. You can help to address a lot of the problems that come with agriculture, be it carbon emission or pollution and so on. So if I were you, I would seriously think about going into the sector because it's so exciting. Good morning, AG Mullah. Thank you for joining. We have fewer people here today, huh? Okay, but that's okay. I just hope that what I've shared today is something that is useful for everyone. So if you don't have any more questions for me, or you don't have any more comments for me, we will call it a day. I want to wish you all the best. If you're going back to school, Sidratul, I'm sorry that you're not going back yet. I hope that you have been able to learn at home, and so if you're not going back to school yet, do join us again next week. We have the final part of the climate change module. Uh, and hey, we are finishing the online series, but I will be coming up with some online quizzes that you can do based on the series that you have watched before. So please look out for that. Actually, I will share with you where to go and get this. Resources so that you can go back and share it with your friends as well. So I'm posting them here. Oops. I hope you can see it. Yeah. And yeah, so share it with your friends as well, and try and do some of the quizzes if you can, because if you have a chance to watch through all of the series, you should know many of these questions that we'll be asking with the quizzes. If you finish the quizzes, you will get a badge and a cert from us. So, but it's not here yet, so it's coming soon. Please be on a lookout for it. And we, after this climate change module, we are probably going to start a new series. No more climate change, but going to talk about something else. So again, this is the link where you can find out what is the next series that is coming up. I'm personally I'm very much excited and looking forward to it, because the content is so fun. The learning is so exciting. So I really hope you will continue to join us. Ajimula, I'm so happy that you're going to be able to go back to school. So stay safe and all the best to all of you. I hope that you will have so much fun going back to school, meeting your friends again, and learning new things. It's very, very exciting for all of you. So with that, take care, and I see you again next week. Thank you, everyone.